my name is FFXIV, and I need to brighten the... Wait a minute. Everything's wrong. 1 second. That's better. Hello, everybody. My name is FFXIV, and that is not my intro. We're gonna roll with it. And welcome to a follow-up video to my Final Fantasy video from about 2 years, about a year and a half ago. Similar to that Overwatch video that I theoretically released first. I don't know what Future Me did, but I'm assuming I released the Overwatch video first because I've just said it out loud. Anyway, yes, I am releasing a follow-up to my Final Fantasy XIV video because it feels like it's long overdue. And as you may have noticed, the B-roll for this video is in fact not Final Fantasy XIV. Because unlike with Overwatch, I have not returned to Final Fantasy XIV. It's been... I would say it's been 2 years since I stopped playing. I guess it's been 2 years since I unsubscribed. But realistically, it's closer to like 3, even arguably 4 years since I stopped playing the game regularly. And I feel like I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. Hopefully this will be a lot shorter than the Overwatch video. The Overwatch video got really rambly too. That really didn't help. My brain doesn't focus very well, does it? Anywho, but as far as Final Fantasy XIV is concerned, no, I have not returned to it. I know that there was a... what was the EU Fan Fest recently? And I know that the next expansion, Evercold, has been released. But there has been a... for me, there hasn't been enough changes, I feel like, when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV to even tempt me to return to the game. It's not even that I just needed a break. It's simply that I just... It's a little complicated. I guess I should kind of go back to the beginning, because I mentioned this the last time I talked about Final Fantasy XIV. But my issues with 14 really kind of go all the way back to Stormblood, when they started slowly squeezing out the endgame content. You know, they started slowly kind of like reducing it, right? The lower number of dungeons, and I feel like there was less overall things being released too, right? Like something in my brain is like telling me that it's like the rate at which they produced rather, you know, things like trial fights and so forth just seem to slow down a little bit. I don't know what it is, because it didn't really slow down, did it? But something about it felt like it slowed down. And of course my issues with 14 go all the way back then. Now, my issues definitely were not at all with 14's story. It wasn't with 14's community. You know, a lot of things were going right with the game back in Stormblood. And, you know, I mean, Stormblood certainly was probably up until Dawn Trail the weakest expansion of the game. But, you know, overall the game felt like it was going in a very, very good direction. You know, whatever storytelling weaknesses and whatever content weaknesses 14 had at the time. And then, of course, Stormblood. Shadowbringers, sorry, both start with S. Shadowbringers came out, and that had a dramatic impact on my perception of the game. Mostly because Shadowbringers... well, actually, it's not because Shadowbringers. Heavensward is when I fell in love with the game. But Shadowbringers is when the game peaked for me, right? It's when the game reached its absolute pinnacle in terms of storytelling, the quality of the content overall, the overall quality of the content, and sadly not much else. Realistically, Shadowbringers, at least for me, was carried on the back of the strength of the story and the strength of the characters, the strength of the world building, and the emotion that all invoked. You know, the goodness of all of that storytelling is, evoked genuine emotion out of me, and the end result was an extraordinary level of enjoyment for me. You know, I just enjoyed the game that much. And that was despite the fact that I thought that reducing the amount of dungeons to 1 per patch was a horrific idea. It was horrible. It was a terrible idea. And and realistically, the knock-on effect of that, which is that the diminishing of the worthwhile content in the game got reduced down to the highly repetitive Bozja, which I love Bozja, mind you. I really enjoyed that content. I liked that story, and I thought that the field operations were pretty good. But I genuinely thought that it wasn't help. How do I put this? Bozja suffered from a severe repetition of content. I know I mentioned this last time too, but when you could be in there for 30 minutes and suddenly start repeating content, that just wasn't good. That just wasn't good game design, you know. And I found that very frustrating. And then lump in on top of that, I don't know. There's Final Fantasy XIV, even all the way back to A Realm Reborn, I think has always had issues with excessively repetitive content. I'm not complaining about grinding in and of itself. I've definitely done grinding in games before. But the problem is that in 14, the grind tends to result in lots of repeated behavior, lots of repeated content. Lots of things that like you kind of have to do the exact same way in order to beat it. And that's very boring. That's very boring. That's very tedious. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to run something 10, 20, 30 times, it can't repeat in the exact same way or in almost the exact same way every single time. And this is a problem that Final Fantasy XIV, in my honest opinion, has never been able to fix. Well, it's not even opinion, it's just objective fact, that they've never been able to fix that. You know, it's always like savage fights are always the same dance where you go from point A to point B, everyone gathers together, then they go back out to point C, and it always repeats in that exact same pattern every time you do the fight. And I mean, I guess that's good for learning it, but it's not good for maintaining mental engagement. And I kind of wonder, actually, if that's why very few people engage with savage content, because a lot of people don't want to be bored out of their minds. To say nothing of the fact that lots of players are not very good at the game, but I'm not going to judge people for that. It's an MMO. We're not talking about Overwatch here. We're talking about games where it's like, no, you should be allowed to not be particularly good at the game and still be able to enjoy it. Right? So I'm not complaining about that, okay? That being said, though, and then of course there's Endwalker. And I know I offered on the last video the very controversial opinion that Endwalker actually wasn't really good. And it was mostly because of, again, the content cycle being extremely slow, and they slowed it down even more by adding 2 additional weeks to every patch, which caused even more problems because it's like the game's already kind of boring, and then suddenly you got 10 more weeks between expansions. That's not a very good look. That's not a very good idea, Yoshi P. But then on top of that, the narrative of Endwalker doesn't hold up against scrutiny. It doesn't hold up when you kind of analyze it for plot holes and character consistency and making sure that everything kind of adds up and that you don't have any sort of really poorly explained, I'm not sure where I'm going with that sentence, but you don't have any sort of like poorly explained mechanical elements, I guess, in the actual universe. You know, one of the things that really frustrated me about Endwalker's story right from the get-go, I'm not going to rehash the Hermes thing, but one of the things that really frustrated me from the get-go was the fact that Meteon was the cause of the final days. I thought it was really weird that the cause of the final days, the cause of, countless deaths across the universe came from Atheris. I feel like it would have made a lot more sense and would have been a lot more engaging if it had been some sort of external threat. I know I mentioned this in the last video, but that's been on my mind a lot recently. Like, I've just been kind of like thinking it through in my head, and I can't help but just feel that it's like, man, imagine if it had been something more of an existential threat. And imagine if it hadn't just been resolved with a nice, neat little bow at the very, in one expansion. Because it didn't feel like a one expansion resolution. It felt like it should have been longer and it should have been a lot more. and it wasn't. And it's still weird to me that, according to everything we've heard, it's like, the idea was to resolve it in 2 expansions, but Yoshi P decided to rush it into 1. And I don't know if that was Square Enix executives, if that was him, but it really did a disservice to what was really shaping up to be a phenomenal, what would have been a phenomenal, like, kind of finale to what we got in Shadowbringers, and we didn't get that. And then, of course, Dawn Trail. And Dawn Trail is the thing that killed my love of the game. Because, of course, slow content cadence, but then also the story was really, really inadequate. There's, like, a lot of people harp on, and rightfully so, the promise that we were going to get kind of a summer vacation expansion, and we were going to be pitted against some of the Scions, and that is the exact opposite of what we got. And I know this has been rehashed plenty of times over the past 2.5 years. I know that's been rehashed, ad nauseum almost. But it's really hard to take a game that gave us Heaven's Word and Shadowbringers and reconcile it with a game that gave us Dawn Trail. And given that, for me, my personal love of Final Fantasy XIV was tied very heavily into the story and not into the gameplay, it makes it that much more frustrating to deal with, like, emotionally and kind of intellectually too. Because there's a part of me still, even though I stopped playing the game regularly back in, Endwalker, and then just totally fell out of love with the game in Dawn Trail, there's a part of me that wishes that I could fall back in love with the game, who wants to, return to the game that I played 6 years ago and loved 6 years ago and played religiously 6 years ago. But I just can't anymore. And I think, there's the part of me that's just so frustrated by that. Because it's hard to let go of the things that you love, right? It's really hard, especially when the thing that you love is an objectively good thing. I'm not talking about, let's hear about something dark or edgy. I'm talking about something here that was, objectively good. Something that was such a good story and had, respectably good gameplay. And in a lot of ways, the gameplay is better now than it was before, not in some ways, not in the terms of the jobs. I talked about the jobs the last time and how they simplified Dragoon, and it just made me go, I'm not having fun playing Dragoon anymore. But just in terms of the fights are, I feel like the fights have gotten progressively better every expansion. I feel like that dance that I did complain about nonetheless has improved, and they have tried to do little things to make the fights a little bit more dynamic. Not enough, but they've done something, right? And at the same time, it's just, I see a lot of the endemic problems that the game has been suffering from, and I see very little evidence that they're trying to do anything to really genuinely fix it. To make, boss fights more interesting, to make dungeons more dynamic, to speed up the patch cycle again, because they really need to do that. I don't know why I understand why they slowed it down. It made sense for them to slow it down for Endwalker, right? Because everyone at least assumed that Endwalker was an absolute bear to actually produce, and that the only way to in order to give the development team a break, Yoshi P's like, all right, we're gonna get 2 extra weeks every patch cycle. So every patch is gonna be 3 months, or what was it, 3.5 months to 4 months, or whatever it was. And that made sense. But even then, even by the end of Endwalker, should have been ramping back up again, because you have customers paying real money to play the game every month, and yet you're not giving them the content to justify paying to play the game every month. And it's just really weird to me that they haven't done anything about that, unless they have. I mean, I've not really been keeping up with it, but I feel like I would have heard something if Yoshi P came out and said, if Yoshi P came out and said, it's like, so we're speeding up our content cadence again because we've heard you and we understand you're disappointed with all this money you're spending. But he doesn't even seem to mention it. He doesn't seem to even think about the fact that people are spending, all this money for not just their subscription, but for retainers and all that. It's just, I don't know, it boggles the mind a little bit because it feels a little tone deaf. And a lot of what the dev team's been doing in recent years feels a little tone deaf. And I found that just very disheartening. Because I don't know if it feels like they're taking the player base for granted or what. But it just, to me, it feels like there's a disconnect. Like they're relying on like the hype machine of announcing a new expansion to get people to come back, but aren't really promising to do anything that really genuinely means anything in the grand scheme of things. Like I saw that those cosmetic upgrades, and I'm not impressed by that. I don't need two-tone hair, or I don't, or whatever. What was the hair thing? There was a hair thing. I don't remember what it was. You have two-tone hair already, but it's it's not solving the problems the game actually needs to be solved in the game, and I'm just sad. I'm a little tired. I'm not really tired anymore because obviously I stopped caring about the game 2 years ago. But the part of me that's nostalgic is sad for that. The part of me that remembers, feeling strong emotion when Harshaphon died, or who remembers feeling like the Etheric Chemical Research Facility was the coolest dungeon I'd ever been in up to that point. It probably wasn't, but that music made it the coolest dungeon I'd ever been in at that point. And the part of me that felt like I was traveling to foreign countries when I went to Kugane and to shit. What's Hien's country's name again? Why can't I remember? Oh no! See, that's how long it's been, and that's how much emotions leached out of my soul. I don't even remember. I don't even remember Doma. I got it. I just remember the dungeon's name, Doma Castle. And got it. I got it. Whew, I was a little scared there for a second. And I remember the me that, that grew to love Emetsu, who literally got pulled along in the exact way that, Ishikawa's writing wanted you to go. Wanted you to be suspicious of Emetsu and wonder what his game was. And then in the very end to kind of, understand him and kind of love him in his way, but also realize that, no, we can't agree with him. We can't support him because what he wants now is, terrible and evil, even if what he desires is not fundamentally. Like, I miss all that. And I miss the Warrior of Light fight. And I miss, To the Edge. What a brilliant song. Even to this day, I love that song so much. And it's just, I miss all of that. But I don't feel like I'm ever going to get that again. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Evercold will prove me wrong and will prove 14's detractors wrong, but I'm not convinced. Even if the story is good, it feels like the Overwatch situation from a year and a half ago, where I'm like, no, the devs broke trust and they're going to have to do a whole heck of a lot to bring me back. Now, funnily enough, Team 4 did that. I kind of wonder if Creative Unit 3 can do that. But it's going to take me hearing a whole lot of good news about Final Fantasy XIV for me to finally check it out again. And even then, I'm most of the way through Dawn Trail, never actually beat the main story. I'm going to have to do a lot of catching up. I'm going to be way behind the times. Is it really going to be worth it? I feel like it's very weird to try and catch back up in an MMORPG, and I'm not sure you can actually do it, especially when you take a very long break like I have. So I guess we'll have to see. In the meantime, as you may have noticed, I have, actually, I don't know where I put my camera in this one. I feel like I'm going to be in a slightly different position than in the Overwatch video. But as you may have noticed, the B-roll, of course, is not Final Fantasy XIV, is in fact the private server Horizon 11. The only real reason I kind of played a little bit was really to get B-roll for this video. But at the the same time, you know, I'm a little nostalgic for Final Fantasy XI. I'm definitely nostalgic for a legacy server that is going to keep the 75 cap. And they just released Treasures of Outer so I'm kind of curious if maybe I should play it for a little bit. Now, of course, the one downside of Final Fantasy XI is that it's a ludicrous time sink compared to Final Fantasy XIV. I don't really know if I have the time to play it. Maybe if I could do it full time, but I don't know. That seems a little hefty. You know, it's like streaming again. Oof. I'm not a very good streamer to begin with, and I don't know if I could actually pull that off. But who knows? We'll see. A lot of things are changing for me lately, as you may have noticed, and I didn't mention this in the last video. But as you may have noticed, all my disc plates are off the wall. And you may have noticed that some of my shelves are a lot emptier than they were. And the big part of that is that I am moving in a week. Or, well, probably not a week from when this is released. Unless I edit it tonight. But I'm probably not going to edit tonight. I'm probably going to edit tomorrow. Tomorrow being Saturday. Actually, a week from the day I would edit this would actually probably be a week from when I move. And I'm moving because I am getting ready to, in the relatively near future, move in with my girlfriend. And we will just have to, you know, and it's very exciting. You know, my life is going in directions that, you know, 2 years ago I never would have expected it to have. You know, it's almost our 2-year anniversary, in fact, which is really crazy to think about. You know, I spent an inordinate amount of time in my life, you know, just totally alone. You know, not thinking anything was ever going to get better, and yet here we are. So, I'm trying to improve things, trying to make my life better, trying to do better. Partially because I think she deserves better. So words. We'll see where I end up. You know, maybe I can try this whole YouTube and Twitch thing again, and maybe I can't. I don't know. We'll see. For my part, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. This did end up being way shorter than the Overwatch video, and ended up being way less rambly too. I don't know why. I think because my thoughts were way more focused on this one. Anyway, thank you all for watching. And I'll see you next time. Until next time. Gosh, I did the thing again. Until next time, everybody.